Hello and welcome at Mintos Ask Anything session. This is the fourth session dedicated funds in recovery. My name is Undis and today I'm going to be your host. And also today with me is Dmitry, Head of Special Exposure Management.
Very good afternoon, dear investors.
Dmitry, would you like to start with today's agenda?
Thank you, Undi, with a great pleasure. So, dear investors, today we thought to structure our 1 hour Ask Me Anything session in the following way. As you can see on the screen, in the first part, we would like to give you a portfolio overview to take you through figures and results we achieved in the third quarter this year versus what we have planned, what we have forecasted, what we have promised you before, and also give you an outlook for the fourth quarter this year. Afterwards, or in the second part, Q&A funds in recovery, we would like to take you through questions, general questions we have grouped together, whereby Undis will also explain the waterfall principle and other general questions related to recovery. In the last part, the third part of our Ask Me Anything session, we would like to take a single case view on each case and answer your questions related to each specific lending company.
Thank you, Dmitry. So, what is the bigger picture of funds in recovery?
Well, yes, exactly. Let's start with the big picture first. And here we have several bullet points with figures, which shows you a big picture behind the dynamics in the recoveries. So initially, there were 134 million euros distress exposure at suspension. And already more than a half of that, the investors, is recovered. Brilliant, the recovery figure to date of euro 68 million. We have achieved 5 full recoveries, 1 partial recovery, altogether adding up to roughly 30 million euros, and also 3 complex restructurings, which we'll talk about slightly later. Our lifetime recovery, though, is estimated at the rate of 60 to 65%. And in the meantime, a net long-term return for a diversified investor remains in the area of 8 to 10%. And Undi, maybe you want to comment on this graphical illustration of what I have just said?
Sure, Dmitry. So, all dear investors, also you can visit Mintos page and view yourself our historical performance by on top of the page clicking on more, then statistics, and you will find historical performance page. And you will also be able to see what are actually the net returns by years so far. If you're going further, Dmitry, did actually all the defaults happen in one day, or actually they were spread out across the several quarters and years?
Well, most of the defaults are coming in the COVID time, where businesses across the globe and economies were strongly hit by pandemics. The investors, we thought of showing you our portfolio view also using the timeline. So let me take you through this slide. What does it mean and what kind of a message we're trying to channel to you? On the vertical axis, you see exactly the timeline, starting from 2017, going to current year 2021. While on the vertical axis, you see funds in recovery measured in million euros. As you can see, most of the cases, they hit exactly 2020, from first to third quarter, where most of suspensions and defaults took place as a result of pandemic mostly. In green, we have cases which have been fully recovered, which I have just already mentioned in one of the previous slides. So it's a 40 case, which defaulted after second restructuring in 2019, second quarter. We had to pursue legal enforcement and we reached 100% recovery here. We also had two liquidation cases, Peachy UK case and one Kosovo case, Utah, which are also successfully 100% recovered. We also had one case which was repaid, and the Mintos team has done a good job in making that repayment happen. This was one of our largest exposures, Akulaku, an Asian case. And a Kazakh loan originator 24 was restructured in summer 2020. And as a result of that restructuring, there was 100% repayment achieved with interest also paid to you, the investors. We have one case which is partially recovered in the second quarter of 2021, which is eCash, the case known to you. We will talk a little bit more about that when we come to the single case view. And we also have certain cases marked in gray color. Some of them work in progress. WIP stands exactly for that, and also other cases. What do we mean work in progress? I'm referring to a case like Monego. We're working to make sure that recoveries are sustainable and are reaching you on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. Same about Varks. Getbucks, Zambia and Botswana is something that is taking a lot of effort of our team at the moment, where we're trying to land it in a kind of a restructuring runway. While the cases Eurosand and Rapido Finance, which actually emerged prior to COVID pandemic outbreak, will have to be eventually written off. The yellow line shows fund in recovery in each given specific time period. And at the moment, you can see that funds that are remaining in recovery amounting to a figure of 71 million euros. While the recovery so far reached, the cash that have been repaid, recovered and repaid to you, the investors, is amounting to a figure of 68 million euros. Let me carry on with a big picture, please, and portfolio view, and maybe Undi, you would like to bring us to the next slide.
Yes.
Here we have a comparison of what was actually forecasted for the third quarter and what was achieved. As you can see, the investors, the amount of funds which was forecasted for the third quarter of this year is 4 million euros, while the actual recovery fact is about 1 million higher. So we've overachieved our recovery estimations, and the recoveries to a figure of roughly 5 million euros. The main drivers behind this overachievement is, of course, known case to you, A40, which I've just mentioned in the previous slide, and that delivered 100% recovery. Finko Armenia slightly outperformed during the third quarter. And while we also have cases where we have a deviation downwards, where we could not achieve planned ambitious recovery forecast we had for the third quarter, I would like to outline two cases. One of them is Getbucks, Botswana and Zambia, where we only managed to achieve half, if we're talking about Getbucks, Botswana, of what we have actually forecast for the third quarter. And also we have quite a significant deviation in collections in AlexCredit portfolio. And we will definitely talk about those two cases later, and I'll explain what are the main reasons behind those deviations. The next slide, the investors, illustrates our outlook going forward in terms of monetary recoveries, what you can see in the last column, and also recovery rates and time in recovery. So for the fourth quarter 2021, our focus is 2.27 million euros, where the largest drivers will remain Monego, Finko, both Ukraine and Armenia, and Capital Service. In blue, you may find those cases where we have changes, either in the recovery rates or timeline for the recovery. For example, we have fine-tuned our estimate of timeline behind recovery of Getbucks. We believe that given current financial standing of Getbucks, it would be possible to recover only in 2026, which is more or less realistic to company's financial standing at the moment. We are estimating expected recovery lifetime less than 50%. This is due to a huge uncertainty we're currently facing in that particular recovery case, which is basically connected with the company's inability so far to attract necessary funds to stay as a going concern long term. We have also altered, changed time in recovery for Dziesiatka Finance, and we changed the recovery timeline from 2021 to 2022, which means that we are bringing this timeline to a more realistic recovery horizon, because as we have informed you, we have just filed the civil claim to Latvian court, and it will take time for the court to make a decision. We have also changed our timeline estimate for Finko Armenia, whereby the source of recovery is Finko portfolio in Armenia, and I think realistically the estimated timeline is between 2022-2026. Earlier, we had a very conservative estimate over Monego recovery outlook, but as we managed to reach certain progress in that case as well, we think that recovery waterfall will also continue during this year. The only thing that we've been approached and informed by the liquidated team that due to COVID complications, recoveries will slightly decrease. We will continue informing you how we go about this particular case. And going to the next slide, where here we have most of general questions, and Undi, if you do not object, please, I will take the first one.
Yes, Dmitry.
So the first question asks, why no group guarantees was used in case of Finko, Monego, and Getbucks? To be honest with you, the investors, we've been asked these particular questions quite frequently when it comes to this particular case. So let me just explain you the general approach behind how lenders and us, of course, Mintos, go about guarantees. So there are different types of guarantees. One type of guarantee is a irrevocable guarantee of a, for example, AAA rated financial institution or a cash deposit, whereby by calling that you ensure immediate cash at your account, which would be then possible to distribute among you, the investors. When we talk about corporate guarantees, this is not quite the same. This is corporate guarantees, not always your fast route or fast track, shortcut, whatever to money. It rather gives you a leverage vis-a-vis your distressed counterparts. And lender has to be very careful in defining a strategy going forward, whether to call a guarantee and to have a good, fully fledged legal case and no recoveries, rather than to assess carefully guarantees and guarantors and borrowers' financial performance and to select the optimal strategy. The strategy that was selected by Mintos, in our view, ensures much better recovery waterflow if we would pursue with a legal case against a holding company or would call a guarantee.
Thank you, Dmitry, for covering the first question. So I will head further with the next one. And before I do that, dear investors, I would also want to stress out actually how we are going to do the second part of it, so which is a Q&A and answering the general questions. So we have selected here top 10, the most upvoted questions. And also we have grouped together some additional questions which actually go in line. So after covering the first ones, we will also have a step back and explain you actually how the recoveries occur, and also what is actually behind the payments waterfall and so how it happens. And then with this also reflect your submitted questions. So yeah, to continue, then the second question is about the overview section and how the net annual return is reflected there. So currently, funds in recovery are not taken into account in net annual return calculations. However, we are developing functionality that will take into account this, as well as soon as the case is going to be closed. Then all the loans that are remaining will be also then allocated to the according status. So in this case, bad debt status. And then moving forward, the third question is about the buyback guarantee. So basically, guarantee or buyback obligation is loan enhancement. Where the lending company has the obligation to repay the loans that are late more than 60 days. So some of the lending companies have failed to meet the obligations. So, and also this is the reason why we are having funds in recovery session to shine more light what we are actually doing and what is the progress. So going further, next question is about secondary market and allowing to sell loans on the secondary market that are defaulted. So similar feedback we actually have already received previously from the investors, and we have taken our time to evaluate the opportunity to allow this and develop necessary functionality. However, what we see is that there is higher demand from investors to sell such loans, but not so high amount to actually buy defaulted loans. And so we have arrived to a conclusion that if we would allow and we would have such a market, it wouldn't be fully functional. So therefore, we have also put our efforts to develop more necessary functionalities at this moment. Dmitry, would you like to take the fifth question?
Sure, with pleasure, Undi. Thanks. In what way will you improve legal structures to ensure better recoverability for the future loan originator default? Escrow accounts, cash buffer, junior share? Well, the investors, first of all, as mentioned before, a recovery rate of 60 to 65% is a pretty good result already, which proves that Mintos does have a proper legal structures. In particular, a 40 case where recovery was reached via enforcement once again proves that Mintos legal structures are recovery proof. However, what else can be done, of course, in the jurisdictions where it's possible, for example, Poland, several other European jurisdictions, we are considering having escrow accounts in place, what will ultimately ensure a proper control over the cash flows. Another example, recently there was a loan originator onboarded in Mexico, whereby our sales team implemented together with their clients a robust trust structure, which has a very strict mechanism of cash flow control. So this would be main angles where we're heading up at the moment when we're talking about improving our legal structures.
Thank you, Dmitry, for elaborating on this. So before we move forward to the next set of questions, we went through all of them, and what we understood, there is still quite a lot uncertainty or how we actually allocate funds that we have recovered. So here I would want to actually take a step back and first of all explain how actually lending companies get suspended and how funds in recovery actually occur. So usually before suspending a lending company, there might be some funds that are not yet transferred to us by the lending companies. So basically, these are the funds that are borrower repayments as a first group. Then there are lending company repurchases and the loans that should go for a buyback guarantee. So these are the loans that are 60 plus days late. Further, once actually the lending company is defaulted, there are two options how the case can go further. First of all, this is amortizing all the loans as usual. So accordingly, basically this would be that we are first amortizing all the borrower repayments because these are the loans that have been actually repaid by the borrowers. And so basically this money has been received by the lending company. Then there are repurchases, and only in the end, these are buyback guarantees, loans which were not actually repaid, and so there was not money received. And then the last one is basically if it's not possible to amortize loans accordingly to this, then all the loans are accelerated and everything is repaid as repurchased loans in a historical order from the oldest to the newest. So saying this, I would want to also move forward with answering investors your questions. And as we can see here, so from the 6th to the 9th question, you're also asking about how the funds are distributed. So is it possible for us to also deliver expected recovery for each investor and to actually see which loans have been amortized? So referring back to what I explained previously, in many cases, the recoveries come from the borrower repayments. So this is especially in Varks case where actually also you are asking questions. So most of the all the funds basically from the Varks are recovered from the borrower repayments and then by lending company transferred to Mintos. So only when we receive the loan, the funds with a list of the loans that have been repaid, we can do these repayments to you. So saying this, not in all the cases we are actually able to give you specific lists for each lending company how the repayments are going to happen. So then if we're moving also further, there are also again, some questions about the specific lists, what we could deliver to you. So one of the things what we are investors going to explore and see possibility of implementing is providing you a list of loans post factum when the funds have been already redistributed to you. So there are also some questions related to specific lending companies, so basically regarding eCash. And this question is asking why some investors received 35% and some investors didn't receive this amount. So basically, in eCash case, all the recovered funds were redistributed accordingly to the borrower repayments. So basically, all the loans that we repaid were matched with the borrower repayments. So in this case, we reflected the situation, how actually the recoveries had happened, and we repaid to those investors whose actually underlying loans had the borrower's repayment. And the last question from the general questions is about the notes. So if the recovery process with the note structure will change. And the answer here is simple, no, it won't change. So this concludes the second part of our today's session. And we arrive actually to the third session. And we are actually continuing also answering your questions, dear investors. And these questions are going to be specifically for each case. So, Dmitry, the first lending company is eCash. And the first question, and also, do we have any news about eCash funds in recovery?
Well, not much really, Undi, to be frank, other than that the recovery for eCash has been completed and the cash has been distributed to you, the investors. And then the second question here, coming from Michael, is asking us, all my outstanding payments from eCash still shows as in recovery, even though I have been told many times that the recovered amounts are being distributed. I think you have already covered the theory behind such questions, or is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, Dmitry. So, have to admit, dear investors, that there has been a delay to set remaining loans from eCash in a bad debt status. And this was due to simple reason that we are still developing functionality that will be finished anytime soon. And as soon as it is done, all the loans are going to be put in bad debt status. So, and the last question from the eCash is how much were all these assets from eCash distributed amongst the creditors? So, Dmitry, also, I believe this has been covered by us.
Well, yes, we have an answer for this question, of course, and indeed, the investors we were by one of the largest creditors representing you, and also they were investors of eCash itself. So just not to confuse, there were investors which are you, the investors, represented by us, and also a group of private individuals that have invested in eCash and appeared as a creditor. They've actually lent money to eCash, to be more precise, rather than invested into equity. To remind you, the deal with eCash was that at a certain point of time, we took the bank account statement when there was not much of a loan portfolio remaining anymore, and we've managed to reach an agreement that all cash is distributed 50-50. What does it mean? It means 410,000 euros were distributed to the investors, and the same amount was paid to other creditors, which are primarily investors of eCash. So they actually also had to incur a loss.
So now we arrive to the next case. So this is Cashwagon, a lending company that were operating in 3 countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and was suspended last year, May. Dmitry, there we have 4 questions about Cashwagon. Would you like to cover them?
Sure, Undi. We'll do with pleasure. Before going into each specific questions, let me give you a quick update, basically what has been going on with this particular case. As we informed you some time ago, a liquidation was started by a company called Nexa on the holding company in Singapore. So that particular legal entity entered into liquidation. A liquidated team based in Singapore had an ambition to bring under liquidation umbrella also several subsidiaries of Cashwagon, such as Philippines and also Vietnam, which is also on your radar. We can say that by looking at your questions. Let me start with Philippines. Unfortunately, to launch a bankruptcy, fully fledged bankruptcy proceedings, has not been possible so far. This is because the local management in Philippines had showed zero cooperation with liquidated team. And therefore, launching a bankruptcy proceeding is very problematic at the moment. Nor can liquidation can be actually launched there, because in Philippines there is a substantial amount of tax debt accumulated, and as you know, with a substantial tax debt, the company cannot be liquidated. We keep in contact with a liquidated team in Singapore. We also have a all creditor meeting which is going to be scheduled next week. And I have already asked the liquidator team to provide a feedback on what is the possible line of action and a solution vis-a-vis Philippines and Vietnam. The situation in Vietnam has not changed significantly. As you know, there was a criminal investigation launched there. As a result, some funds of Cashwagon Vietnam was simply frozen, cash funds on their accounts. Theoretically, such a criminal investigation should either result in a full-fledged criminal case or simply to be stopped, and then the funds could be frozen and the company could resolve operations. Unfortunately, criminal investigation is still under process. Moreover, it has been escalated from the Ho Chi Minh City, which is a domicile of Cashwagon Vietnam, to the capital of Vietnam, Hanoi. It is dealt with at the high rank police in Vietnam, and it's very difficult to estimate for us and also for the liquidator team in Singapore where can that possible end. None of the companies in Philippines or Vietnam is really operational. They're not even a going concern. There is a minimum amount of staff kept, and the management is not very much cooperative, unfortunately. Our line of action is to be in contact with liquidator to make sure that we can still launch legal processes, liquidation or bankruptcy in both of these subsidiaries which are possible. Let me now go to your questions. Cashwagon Philippines has not submitted for bankruptcy process yet. We hear the same sentence every month since April. What are you really going on, and is there any business? Well, the investors, I believe I already covered this question, which allow me to go to the next one. Cashwagon, no update since April. Nothing happening to share with investors. More details. Is it expected recovery till 2021? Why recovery rate dropped from 40 to 25%? Well, the investor, first of all, we have to bring to your attention that previously we've actually showed a recovery rate estimate in amount of less than 25% rather than 40%. And indeed, we need to bring to your attention that the expected lifetime recovery rate, less than 25%, represents also recoveries, cash recoveries, which have already happened, and the cash have already been distributed to you, the investors. We realistically do not foresee any substantial monetary recoveries in entire Cashwagon case in the near future. And therefore, this recovery rate is more or less representing what have already happened. A year passed, and you say Cashwagon Vietnam continues to await criminal proceedings over and over again. You have to say more in order to gain my trust. Well, Johnny, I think your sentiment can be fully understood here. We would want to learn more and know more about possible outcomes in that particular criminal case. But unfortunately, given country-specific, this has been very, very challenging to achieve so far. Big concerns of investors are for recovering their money from Varks and Cashwagon. When going to happen this? Only Varks pays these amounts, nothing on Cashwagon. Well, while we have had already several minutes on covering Cashwagon topic, I suggest that we go to Varks, as the question also deals with that particular loan originator, and let me take those questions which come for Varks. Will you ever share IDs of recovered Varks loans? Change of distribution in the middle of process is not transparent and may benefit certain individuals. Undi, I think your good team has already been looking into this topic of whether these IDs can be shared. Maybe you want to bring more visibility to what have you been able to investigate so far in this regard.
Yes, Dmitry, and thank you. So this is true. We have definitely heard you, investors, and we also have received your feedback as this one. So at the moment, as I mentioned previously, all the recoveries from Varks are coming from the borrower repayments. So basically, the funds are allocated accordingly to underlying loans. And so we are going to look into a possibility to share with you list of loans. Post factum, the funds are redistributed. So actually, you also can see which loans were covered at a loan ID level. So yeah, then Dmitry, I will give you the microphone back, and you can also then continue covering other questions.
Thank you. And the next question asks us the following: why not Varks requires some collateral from borrowers to pay off the existing debt toward Mintos investors? Well, the investors here, we need to understand what kind of product Varks has. These are payday loans, short-term installment loans, which in the first place, in the beginning, at the stage of its origination, were never secured. Therefore, it is challenging for Varks to go and ask each borrower for a collateral. What Varks have successfully achieved so far is performed several good restructurings of those single exposures without taking a collateral, but still making the borrower to improve payment discipline. And we can see that in the results which we already shared to you. Moreover, I would like to share with you that Varks has appointed a third-party servicer. It's a professional servicing collection company which works on Varks portfolio funded by your cash, the investors. We have a very good working contact with that particular company, the services, so as with Varks itself. We receive information on a regular basis about portfolios, about recoveries, about forecasts, and so on. And as our team, special exposure management team, in our background, we have also collection experience. We have had an opportunity to discuss with the management of the servicer, the third party appointed by Varks, how they perform recoveries from the operational point of view, and we were quite impressed that these collections are taking place and handled with a very good professional level. Having said that, I think it brings us to the next question, where an investor called Kirill asking, can we outline pessimistic, realistic, and optimistic scenarios in terms of Varks monthly repayments? What would that look like in Mintos' view? Well, Kirill, first of all, when we assess Varks forecast and Varks performance of collections, we asked them already several times, and they delivered pessimistic and optimistic case. Pessimistic outlook, future outlook, and also optimistic, with assumptions which we discussed, which we challenged. And the figure which we showed you before in the Q4 2021 forecast for Varks in particular, this figure represents a realistic scenario which was derived by Mintos team. This is what we believe in. And in fact, it is something in between optimistic and pessimistic scenario of Varks.
I believe this also brings us to the next slide.
I believe so too. Capital service.
Yes, this is a capital service, one of the Polish lenders. And Dmitry, also believe that we have restructured repayment schedule in place here.
Well, indeed, as Capital Service shows in blue color in the slide, in the timeline slide, which we had an opportunity to talk with you about just several minutes before. Restructuring was reached with Capital Service, and currently Capital Service sticks to the repayment schedule, which was also shared with you some time ago to investors. So here's the first question on Capital Service. Is there an escrow account established for Capital Service, as mentioned earlier, so that the repay rates could increase above the repayment plan? Well, the investor, your question is very well understood. However, just to make sure that we understand things equally, please. Escrow account agreement is currently within Capital Service Banks, which is one of the Polish commercial banks, and it is technically prepared for execution. While escrow accounts still does not directly influencing the recovery rate, because what escrow account does in itself, it ensures a control over the cash flow, which is coming from Capital Service and borrowers. So what does indeed influence recovery rate is two things: Capital Service financial performance and its payment discipline, which so far has been very, very good. In terms of financial performance, when closing the restructuring transaction with Capital Service, Mintos was of an expectation that financial performance of the Capital Service may improve in future, as we hope that also COVID situation will somehow, if not end, but will improve, and so on. Therefore, for that reason, one of the clauses that were introduced within the restructuring agreement is a cash sweep, which is set at the level of historic operational profit of Capital Service. Cash sweep haven't still been triggered, but if Capital Service reaches a level of operational profit which would exceed a benchmark fixed in the restructuring agreement, the excess cash Capital Service will have to pay extra and on the top of the regular repayment schedule. As I mentioned, so far, Capital Service has not reached this level of operational profit. However, it is very close to, and the good news is that the company is doing much better financially. We have recently shared CEO statements with you of Capital Service, whereby CEO explains the actions company had to take also on the operational level, and also describes the future outlook. I will go to the next question, if you do not object, please. Tamas from Czech Republic is saying that Capital Service is not paying regular amounts as declared. They pay nothing or just a few cents a month. This is unacceptable. Well, Tamas, first of all, your sentiment is very well understood. We can assure you that Capital Service sticks perfectly to its amortization schedule. And as Undis has described before, the reason that you are still not receiving substantial amount of cash is to do with the scheme, how funds are distributed. There are 63,000 of investors, and naturally, not all of them are getting enough cash at the same time. And then the next question, while Tamas argued here that Capital Service is not paying, the next investor is actually asking us a little bit opposite. Capital Service pays regularly a huge amount to Mintos, but as an investor, I don't see a cent why. So basically, I think this question has already been answered. Has Mintos approved new fleet of dozen cars bought by Capital Service? In one of the previous AMA, you said you will control expenditure, not to let them tunnel. Let me start this question from the end. Indeed, there is a clause in the restructuring agreement whereby any cost over a certain amount of money has to be aligned with Mintos. Therefore, Capital Service has approached Mintos with a request for a consent for asking for permission to change the fleet of cars, which they need for performing their regular operational business activities. So just to make sure that we understand it correctly, when we talk about fleet of cars of capital service, this is not something extra luxury they need. This is something that they need to earn money and to pay back. Our team, together with the risk management team of Mintos, we performed a very robust analysis looking into economic effect of changing this car fleet and whether this is something that the company would really need to do. And we arrived to a conclusion that this is something that is good for the company economically, and the company will benefit. And they will be able to save more money in the midterm, thus having a more cushion to repay you, the investors.
Thank you, Dmitry, for walking us through capital service case and answering also investors' questions. So with this also we go to the next lending company, which is Express Credit lending company from Zambia. And here we have only one question from investors. Dmitry, would you like to take it?
Yeah, sure, Undi, with pleasure. I have seen neither cash from Express Credit, Getbucks so far, and are you still offering loans from them? No, we do not. Both companies suspended, and there are no loans offered at the moment at the platform.
Mm-hmm. And the next case is AlexCredit, a Ukrainian lender. And Dmitry, I believe you will also explain the general situation in Ukraine and also then head further with the investor questions here.
That sounds like a very good plan. Thank you, indeed. Well, the investors, as I promised and as I mentioned in the beginning of our Q&A session, that in AlexCredit case, we have quite a significant deviation from what we have forecast and what is actually happening. So let me give you an update here before I take your questions. As you remember, the deal with AlexCredit was that Mintos takes over the largest asset of the company, which is the loan portfolio. And that helped to avoid long-lasting bankruptcy or any legal process in Ukraine. This particular asset loan portfolio was then passed to a third independent company servicer, collection company, which started to perform collections. Unfortunately, and we were not quite lucky in terms of timing, Central Bank of Ukraine introduced regulations which apply to entire collection industry. And those regulations apply to things like when can you call the borrower, when can you call the borrower, how many text messages you can send, what can you say, what you cannot say, and importantly, what kind of data can you deal and use when you're dealing with a distressed end borrower. This unfortunately resulted in a drop of collections across the entire collection industry in Ukraine. So we're not the only ones with AlexCredit portfolio who is behind the forecast. And this is the reason why we have this deviation. Together with the third-party servicer, we have worked out the plan how to improve the situation, which tool sets to perform in addition to what is now being done with the portfolio and how to go further. Let me now go to each of the questions. No news from AlexCredit. Can you open up expectations and how you are going to distribute what you recover? Well, I think this question was already very well covered by Undis, and I will go to the next one. Many AlexCredit loans have been repaid back by the loan taker, but the money has not been forwarded to Mintos. Should these loans be included in the 25 recovery? Well, basically, the fact that AlexCredit has been withholding investors' money, your cash, the investors, was a trigger to us entering into quite tough negotiations and taking over their portfolio. The current recovery rate, which we showed already in one of the tables before, refers to a recovery rate of the portfolio which is currently serviced by the third party. My trust is gone. I withdrew all my money. If companies does not even forward the money that has to be paid by the loan taker, like AlexCredit's case. Well, the investor here, the only thing that we can say that we fully share and fully understand your emotion and sentiment here. And of course, we wish that AlexCredit could have performed better on its obligations, which fortunately was not the case. How is it possible that AlexCredit is doing business and while Mintos is not asking to give them 100% of the money back? Well, the investors, Capital Service was not able to repay 100% of the exposure. So back then we had two choices: either to enter in a lengthy legal process, which would ultimately bring Capital Service into bankruptcy and liquidation, so the company wouldn't be operating anymore. But that unlikely would bring any recovery to the table for you. So the strategy chosen was to take over the asset, which was basically funded by your cash, without of pushing Capital Service to liquidation. Therefore, as a result of that, currently we have an asset which we continue squeezing for cash, despite of all difficulties we're currently facing in Ukrainian environment. But the company, yes, still operating. This would be explanation to the question. I hope it is understood.
Thank you, Dmitry. I hope also that the investors have understood your answers, and we have also shined a bit more light on AlexCredit's case. So moving forward, the next case and question is about Monego, a lender from Kosovo that also was suspended at the end of 2019. So, Dmitry, we have one question, which is actually, we could split also in two parts. And then the first part of the question is how much more you expect to get from Monego. So what do you think, Dmitry?
Well, I think our forecast is already given. We think it's realistic. We think we will be performing a quite decent recovery rate here in this case, in particular, given the dynamics that we managed to show so far. And changing the momentum over the case. As you remember, the investors, we had, say, several months, almost a year without of a decent information, without of any cash coming, and we managed to change that situation 180 degrees. We still forecast and we still believe we will receive cash in 2022. Our recovery rate is forecasted less than 100%, taking into account uncertainty and country specific, and the fact that we have a very limited information, despite we asked the liquidator several times how big is the remaining portfolio, and we would want to know more about recoveries, which we do not have such information. So therefore, we estimate recovery rate less than 100%. You will notice that the going forward payment will be slightly decreased, and liquidated team explains this with the current COVID situation, what we have in Kosovo. And then the second part of the question, I guess, Undi, we may want to address that as well. Yes. What happened with the two companies which get paid before Mintos in a Monego case? Well, the investors indeed, we've managed to catch a liquidator making a payment to two non-registered creditors, which in our review was not quite in line with the regular liquidation practice, which was immediately escalated to the attention of liquidator and also Bank of Kosovo. Taking into account two things. First, that we had quite a positive dynamics in repayments since then, and two, these two payments were very marginal. Our strategy would be to keep a good working relationship with the liquidator and monitor recoveries, rather to escalate further the situation that two companies were paid not quite in a right manner.
Thank you, Dmitry, once more for also answering questions about Monego. And then, if we move forward, we arrive to Getbucks. So this is lender from Botswana and Zambia, and we also have two questions where actually investors are asking updates. So what is happening with Getbucks case?
Well, let me give you indeed an update, which I'm sure will cover both questions. Recently, about 3 months ago, we have agreed on the main restructuring conditions with Getbucks management and key shareholder. Our term sheet have been accepted. The key restructuring terms were at that time that we combined two exposures together, and those exposure, Botswana and Zambia, introduce several covenants which may add control into that case and provide the company with a restructuring solution, which would also enable to repay UD investors on monthly basis. Unfortunately, two things happened since then. The first thing is that unfortunately, Getbucks Botswana is struggling with attracting funding, which resulted into that they have actually stopped monthly payment they were doing so far, and also put a big question mark on the further restructuring because they have actually started now challenging the terms they've initially committed to. We will do everything possible to land this case on the restructuring runway so that it is a win-win-win for everybody, for Getbucks, UD investors, and us. However, since these restructuring talks and efforts have been already going on for several time, we do not exclude a possibility to pursue alternative scenarios. And unfortunately, such alternative scenarios would not also exclude a legal action, which hope we can still avoid in Getbucks case.
Thank you. And indeed, Getbucks case sounds complicated, but as Dmitry also mentioned, we will do all the best in our possibility to actually get the best outcomes for you, us, and also for the lending company. So going forward, it is Rapido, so a lender from Spain, and investors are asking a question: how far is the legal process with Rapido Finance, Dmitry?
Well, dear investors, unfortunately here I have to be very straightforward and honest with you. We are part of the long-lasting insolvency process, and there haven't been any reasonable updates or progress which we would be happy to share with you at the moment.
And with this, we also are coming to the last lending company. So this is also a Polish lender, Dziesiatka Finanse. And I believe, Dmitry, you have an update for us to share.
Yes, we do have an update. Unfortunately, as Mintos team has exhausted our efforts in reaching any sort of constructive dialogue with the management of Dziesiatka, they simply refrain from talking to us, answering our email. They think they can enter into certain obligations vis-a-vis UD investors and us without of honoring them. Therefore, the only remaining route here is a legal route. We have filed a civil claim to Latvian courts just recently, and the legal action is a preferred scenario here in Dziesiatka's case.
Thank you, Dmitry, for all the updates. And also, dear investors, I would want to encourage you to visit our website. So there you also can find dedicated page for funds in recovery, where we are delivering monthly updates each first month Thursday. So we will continue doing this. All the information that we have also reflected here is available on the page. And to conclude, I would like to say a big thank you for tuning in and submitting the questions to us. Still, if there is something that we have not managed to answer in this hour, feel free to reach out to our support. We will definitely answer your questions. Or you also can use community space. We have a special section for the upcoming events where also Mintos Anything session was published, and you can feel free to submit and post the questions which we haven't actually managed to answer there, and our team definitely will take a step to answer the questions for you. So once more, today with you, it was me, Undis from Investor Service, and also Dmitry, Head of Special Exposure Management.